It was a difficult decision that I had to make yesterday. It's not a decision that I wanted to make. It's not a decision that I expected to make. And there was a £22 billion black hole between what the previous government had said they were going to spend and what they were actually spending. And what happened when that previous government made a commitments it could not afford, it put pensions in peril, and it sent mortgage rates and rents through the roof.
Rachel Reeves claimed she'd protect working families, but what if her own policies are hurting them instead? Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now, back to the video. Andrew Neil's explosive interview reveals the shocking truth behind Labour's economic plans. Prepare to see Reeves struggle to defend cuts that affect the very people she vowed to help. Rachel Reeves, Labour's shadow chancellor, recently dropped a bombshell claim about a £22 billion fiscal gap left by the previous government. She expressed shock and dismay at this discovery, painting it as a devastating inheritance that would complicate Labour's economic plans. But is this revelation truly as surprising as Reeves wants us to believe? Economic experts had been sounding the alarm about the UK's fiscal situation long before the election. The Institute for Fiscal Studies, a respected independent think tank, had already provided a comprehensive pre-election assessment of the economic landscape Labour would inherit.
So you admit that this increase could hit workers' pay?
I absolutely accept that wage growth may be weaker than it otherwise would have been. I think it was a difficult decision. The hardest decision in the budget yesterday was on national insurance. I wanted yesterday to get everything out into the open and be transparent about the decisions that I needed to make. I'm not going to be coming back with a budget like this in the future.
Their analysis pointed to significant financial challenges ahead, regardless of which party took power. Andrew Neil, known for his incisive political commentary, didn't hold back in his critique of Reeves's apparent surprise. He questioned how the shadow chancellor, who had been closely monitoring the nation's finances, could suddenly act blindsided by this information. Neil's skepticism highlights a crucial point. Was Reeves genuinely unaware of the fiscal realities, or is this part of a calculated political strategy? As we dig deeper into Reeves's claim, a familiar pattern emerges. Politicians often employ the tactic of blaming their predecessors for economic woes. It's a convenient narrative that allows newly elected governments to lower expectations and justify potential deviations from campaign promises. By framing the $22 billion shortfall as an unexpected discovery, Reeves may be setting the stage for future policy shifts or compromises. But here's where things get really interesting. While Reeves dramatizes this fiscal gap, we must consider the real-world consequences of Labour's economic decisions. How will their policies actually impact the lives of ordinary citizens? Are they truly addressing the cost of living crisis as promised, or are we seeing a disconnect between rhetoric and reality? As we examine Labour's actions since taking office, troubling contradictions emerge. Their pledges to support working families and protect vulnerable groups are being put to the test. The national insurance hike, cuts to winter fuel payments for pensioners, and other policy decisions paint a complex picture of Labour's economic strategy. These choices raise serious questions about the party's ability to deliver on its pre-election promises while navigating the fiscal challenges they claim to have inherited. In the next segment, we'll delve into these specific policy impacts and explore how they align or conflict with Labour's campaign rhetoric. The gap between promises and reality might just surprise you. Labour swept into power on a wave of promises to ease the cost of living crisis. Yet their actions since taking office tell a very different story. What's really happening to people's wallets under this new government, and why are some calling it a bait-and-switch of epic proportions? During the campaign, Labour made grand pledges about supporting working families and providing economic relief. Rachel Reeves, now Chancellor of the Exchequer, stood at podiums across the country, assuring voters that Labour would put money back in their pockets. The party painted a rosy picture of financial stability and growth under their leadership, but as the dust settles on their election victory, a stark reality is emerging. Let's talk about the national insurance hike. This isn't just some minor policy adjustment, it's a seismic shift that's sending shockwaves through businesses and workers alike. The Institute for Fiscal Studies reports that by lowering the threshold for employers from $9,100 to $5,000, Labour has effectively added nearly $800 to the cost of employing someone full-time on minimum wage. Think about that for a moment. How does increasing the cost of employment square with Reeves's promise to boost the economy and support working families? The contradiction is glaring. On one hand, we have Reeves claiming she'll put more money in people's pockets. On the other, we're seeing a rising tax burden that's hitting both businesses and workers. Andrew Neil, never one to mince words, called this desperate stuff. He's right. The disconnect between Labour's pre-election rhetoric and their post-election actions is becoming impossible to ignore. But it doesn't stop there. Labour's economic strategy is raising serious concerns about inflation and living costs. The Consumer Prices Index hit 2.6% in November, from 2.3% the previous month. As prices for essentials climb, families are feeling the squeeze. And what's Labour's response? Silence. Reeves has been notably quiet about the implications of their policies, particularly the national insurance hike. Critics are warning that this approach could lead to stagnation in living standards. Some economists predict that disposable income growth will crawl along at a snail's pace until the end of the decade. It's a grim forecast that stands in stark contrast to Labour's campaign promises of economic prosperity. But here's the kicker. While Labour claimed they would protect the most vulnerable, their actions tell a different story. The cuts to winter fuel payments for pensioners are a prime example. How can a party that promised to shield the elderly from economic hardship justify reducing support during the coldest months of the year? As we peel back the layers of Labour's economic policies, a troubling picture emerges. The gap between their words and actions is widening, leaving many to question the credibility of their entire economic approach. Can Labour reconcile these contradictions, or will the British public be left footing the bill for broken promises? Labour's economic strategy has left many wondering if they can truly deliver on their campaign promises. The stark contrast between their pre-election rhetoric and post-election actions raises serious doubts about their credibility. As we've seen, the national insurance hike and cuts to winter fuel payments directly contradict Labour's pledges to support working families and protect vulnerable groups. This disconnect between words and actions doesn't just affect Labour's reputation, it strikes at the heart of public trust in political institutions. When voters feel misled, it erodes faith in the democratic process itself. The question now is whether Labour can bridge this credibility gap and regain the public's confidence. As Britain faces ongoing economic challenges, from rising inflation to stagnating living standards, the pressure is on Labour to prove they can effectively manage the nation's finances. Can they find a way to reconcile their promises with the fiscal realities they now face? Or will their economic strategy continue to fall short, leaving voters disillusioned and the country's financial future uncertain?